Hello and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. Today I am joined by Liz Murdoch, who is an animal intuitive specializing in talking with dogs. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you.
I'm so delighted to have you here, and I love to include somebody to talk about animal grief because we absolutely adore our dogs and animals, and I think that it's a really important category not to be missed.
Yes.
And I was curious, how did you start this line of work? How did you know that you had this connection with dogs?
So my first experience was in kindergarten at show and tell, where a classmate brought a dog and they were talking about the dog, and it had its nails done with a matching bow. And I could hear this dog thinking, I had this knowing sense the dog was like telling me there's more to me than this. And I remember standing there sort of looking around, feeling like, aren't we going to talk about anything else other than the grooming? And that was my starting point, where I went home and I wanted a dog. I needed a dog. And maybe it was a child wanting to rescue. I don't know. But that got me working with dogs. And then it was, like many of us, a stepping stone kind of experience. I did dog training. I wanted to do animal assisted therapy later in life. But there was a moment when I was working with my dog in a hospital that we were waiting for the team it was animal assisted therapy. And we were waiting for the team to finish with the patient. And I remember looking at my dog thinking, I know what he wants. I know what he's thinking. And I sort of tucked that away. And then it was more just different dog experiences working, that when I ended up, I worked as an animal evaluator for a rescue. And I missed that job. I moved, and there was an animal communication class. And I was like, that's something to do. That sounds good. And I took it, and it was very easy for me. And I learned, and that's why I'm a believer in training, that there's ways to do it. And so as I learned and got schooled on how to do it, and then practiced in that program, I had to have 65 practice sessions for free. And I got referrals, and I did it very, very quickly. And so I was like, I can do this for work. But part of that program had an element of studying grief and animals crossing over. And so I was like, okay, I'll do that. And it opened up a whole new aspect of grief and another part of my work as well. So.
Okay, fascinating. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about the supporting your clients with the grief.
Yeah, so that's been, it started where, can you talk to my dog who's passed away? And it's like, sure, and it's no different for me than an animal that is here with us. And it is different in terms of the animals. Usually there's just so much more love and lightness than an animal who's like, I want a different kind of treat, who's still here. But there's the same communication. But in that communication with clients, some people, they don't want that. They're not ready. And they're just dealing with grief. And so as I've just collaborated with other people and worked with people dealing with grief, I've come to just have a lot of experience working with people whose dogs have passed away. And so I've sort of pieced together my way of doing it, whether supporting people or working with clients. I work with grief counselors. So I'm not a grief counselor, and there are people who specialize in supporting people with bereavement. My aspect has been helping people with making sense of the grief that they have and the guilt, but integrating the dog's perspective when they're comfortable or open to, well, let's find out what your dog would say, or an animal that is in its, I say, crossing the rainbow bridge or about to pass away. And people are, is it my dog's time? I tune into the dog's perspective and can help the people if they want to make a bucket list. If I can say, oh gosh, I'm feeling nausea, I receive messages intuitively. So if I can say I'm feeling X, Y, and Z, and I don't know what the diagnosis has been, but I'm telling them things that I'm getting from the dog, it's like a puzzle piece. So that if I say that your dog is showing me that you've been to one vet, but there's another vet who you've seen, and I think your dog is like pushing you in that direction. And then the people will say, yeah, I've been thinking about going to a second opinion, but they want validation. And so I support people in the dog's perspective, what it's sharing with me that helps them have confidence in their choices or their grief. Like if I say the dog is saying, don't feel guilty, they're like, yeah, I did feel guilty. So it's helping them from the dog's perspective that I have come to see that I can really help people.
Yeah, I think guilt is one of the biggest parts of grief that we can get very stuck on and ruminate a lot. So having a conversation with our pet after they've died must give an awful lot of reassurance.
Yeah, especially when they haven't told me I have guilt. Not everyone has the same kind of guilt, or they have different feelings. But if a dog says to me, if I say, oh, well, your dog is saying you did everything you could, that your dog knows that, then and the person can say, because they hadn't told me, they're like, yeah, I did. Or if the dog says, I'm okay that I went suddenly, it was easier for both of this way. And then they give me reasons, then the person's like, oh yeah, it was sudden, or, it helps them make sense of the situation because they're hearing things from the animal that, like I said, I didn't know, but that's true for their experience. It just helps them process it a little better and take that burden off that sometimes the people put on themselves, but the dogs don't have that same feeling.
Mm. Do you also help support people, say it's a dog that's elderly, or they're at that point where maybe they have to decide to have the dog put to sleep, for example? Do people contact you in that instance?
Yes. So typically, a lot of people will call me because they've worked with me before. And then even if it's been a couple of years, they'll say, I had a woman who did this the other day. I want to check in. I hadn't talked to her for a year. I just want to check in. He's acting different. And I said, don't tell me anything. So I saw the dog. We were on a Zoom call and she's not on the call. It's just me and the dog. She's sitting next to the dog. And I go, oh, he doesn't feel well. And then I start getting all this stuff. And yeah, so when I can say to the person, the dog is showing me a lot of pain. I see like with this particular dog, I saw a spot on its side. I said, I want you to check. I can't diagnose, but that dog wants to go to the vet. Some dogs, another family called me and I didn't know them. And right away I said, your dog wants to be propped up. The dog was in the bed and they propped it up. And I started telling the dog, there were 3 people on the call. And I was telling them about what the dog wanted. And I said, there's a change coming. And she said, yes, the vet's coming this afternoon. They called me, right? The vet was coming. And they said, is our dog ready? And I got a loud no. I mean, I hear it. And I was like, no. And I'm like, oh dear. And I go, no. And I go, okay, tell me what it is you want. And the dog said, I want alone time with each one of you. And I get these very specific knowings. And so they wrote me back several times after that. And they said each one of them knew when their time was up with the dog, that they were like, when a hug, you're done hugging someone. They said it felt like that. They knew when they were done. And they said that the woman who wrote the main letter, she said her dog looked at her in a way she'd never seen before, but she felt complete peace. So when they get information or a bucket list, I'll say, oh, he wants, give it 2 or 3 days and do, your dog wants to go on a car ride, and I'll tell them where the dog wants to go. And they do these things, and it just helps them feel like they've, done something that the dog would want. And there's a shift that they'll say that they feel like it was the right thing to do. It was the right time. So that's why I like doing it a lot.
When an animal dies with your clients, have you found that people have some interesting ways of mourning their dogs?
Yes. So several of my clients, they're like, I don't know what to do. I've walked them through it. And they will say, okay, they'll call me and they say, okay, or I'll know what time when it's happening. And they'll say, now what do I do? I feel like I want to do something. It's typically the ones who want to do something. And so I say, well, have a memorial. And I had a memorial with my dog, and we had a huge showing. Everyone except the mailman came, and I highly recommend it. Invite people. So yeah, they have memorials. I've been Skyped in. I've done this with clients. The last two, one was in India, one was in Denmark. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. And they invite people. Saturday, I say, have a notebook that people can write their favorite memory. Or if there's kids, you can have them draw a picture, and they all will write back, I loved it. I'm so glad I did this. It was so wonderful. Sometimes they have people get up and speak. They have had, one was a horse. And so they visited the stable and decorated the stall where the horse was, and highly recommend having a memorial. Highly recommend it. In whatever way feels right for you, for the person. But yes, people love it.
Yeah, because I think back to when I was younger, we had dogs die, and we did, bury them in the garden and say our goodbyes. I had a horse die actually, which was quite traumatic, and I didn't do any ritual around that. And I feel like that's quite incomplete for me. But I think we're sort of going through such different times right now, but yeah, I can imagine that some people feel that other people judge them or don't feel as compassionate around pets.
So the great thing about these memorials is that only the people who really cared will be there, other than like my postman who was so upset he couldn't come, but he was the kind that gave the dog a bone every day. But if you say, you invite people, we're having a get together. I had people show up. I was shocked that came, and they were so happy to be there, and they can talk about their, what's your favorite memory of Sam? Oh, remember the time, ha, 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 dogs are great. People love them. So if somebody is like, oh, that's silly, they're probably not going to come. And everyone has said how wonderful it was. So I would say just have it. And if you think someone's going to think it's silly, you can invite them and say, I know you think it's silly, you don't have to come, but I really need to do this. I mean, I can't imagine, maybe I'm just so into this, but I really, it's like you're grieving. So yeah, just anyone who's thinking, maybe even if you have 3 people, because it's important to be able to talk about it, and it gives everybody permission to talk about your dog, or they have a release on their dog. I highly recommend it.
I couldn't agree more. And what about when people say things a bit like, oh, well, you can get another dog, or when are you going to get another dog, or things like that? Yeah,
that's so awful. That's so awful. Even I found, and again, there are people who work with the people side of it who are trained in that, which I am not. So I just have experience, and I've done a clubhouse room with people who are grief specialists. So there's a lot of resources if anybody wants grief resources. specifically, or you probably have them in other people in the summit on what to say. But yeah, I've even found that if someone's dog dies and I say, I understand, I don't really understand what it's like with their dog. That's their life. So even I understand can be tricky on what to say. But I think that it's really important to figure out what to say, or like, I care. Can I get you some resources? I'm so sorry. Reassuring people, it can take a long time. Right. It's okay to go at your own pace is much easier, because I've worked with people who I had somebody, it was like 30 years later, we were in a clubhouse room doing grief, and somebody was crying after 30 years because they'd never been given permission or felt safe to let it out and to admit whether it's, I still feel that, I feel grief, I feel anger. You know, if I was a kid, some kids feel angry because of whatever happened. That, yeah, it can take 30 years and it's okay. And so I think if someone's not like wants an answer, what you could say is like, it can take time. It's okay. Take your time. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably a nice thing that people don't hear enough.
Mm-hmm. And it's so true about that it's never too late to grieve.
No. And people ask me that, like, they're like talk to my dog, you know, and I have a master's in education from Columbia University. So I'm very academic in some ways, but I can do this. And so I do. And people ask, so some people I say that because some people are like, I'm not going to do that. But then they change their mind, whether their animal's alive or has passed away. And so I offer reassurance that if you're not ready now, whether it's with me or whoever, I'm not trying to sell you, you know, but it doesn't matter how long it's been. I've talked to animals that have passed away that day, you know, or it's been many years and I have always gotten something. Or there are people who want, you know, it's like your own intuition. I've coached them to, you know, get still and invite the animal to come to you in whether in a dream. And like I said, I don't know how it works, but I know that it happens. Mm-hmm. And so whatever the timing is the main thing is just to be open and let it take its course. But you don't feel like the grieving person, has to rush anything. You don't. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You don't.
Interesting work, because you're like essentially a medium for dogs.
Yeah, sort of. You know, to me, I'm like, oh, I guess so. But yeah, I mean, the first time I did it with a client, I was at an event and a woman came up and said, can you talk to my dog who died? And I was like, sure, I've studied it. Yeah, sure. I'll see what I get. And so we sat down. She didn't have a picture with her for some reason. And so I was like, oh, dear God, I hope I get something, because I was right on the spot and I was new at doing it in a public place for sure with a time crunch. And I had to really focus and block everything out. And I said, sure. Let me see what I can get. Do you have a particular question? And she said, yes. She wanted to know what kind of flowers to take her. No, she wanted to know what to take her dog. She said, I just want to know what I should take to the gravesite, what I can do. And I was like, okay. And the first thing I got was the dog didn't care. A lot of animals don't care. And so I went back to the dog and I was, as I do with all dogs, please be specific. Show me what you want so that your person knows it's from you. So I'm like this, I'm like, okay, well, your dog says to bring yellow flowers. And she burst into tears because that's exactly what she had taken when she had gone the previous week. Yeah. So yeah, it's just amazing. And I guess it's like being a medium. Most of my sessions are dogs that are alive. I'd say 75%. And so I feel like I'm having a conversation with the dog. Another animal, this was also in an event, a couple showed up and everyone had been bringing their dogs. It was like one right after the other. And I said to them, where's your dog? And they're like, oh, she died. I was like, oh, and they said, but she's here. Can you still talk to her? I said, yes. So we sat down and I tuned in right away and I told them things. Again, I didn't know these people, but they were crying. It was all like, yes. And so the woman asked, does she send a sign? And I said, let me check. And I said, do you send a sign? And then I was thinking, sometimes I'm trying to figure it out, decipher the message kind of thing. And she said, I think she said, is it in like a dream or something? And I'm like, no, it's not a dream. And I go, it's bells. It's like a chiming kind of thing. And the woman looked at me. She's like, I haven't heard any. And just as she said that, these chimes across the park went off. And all three of us were like, oh my gosh. So the chimes stopped.
Ooh, we just had a chime.
And we did. We did. That's so we can, I said, it's a chime. So she goes, okay. And no one mentioned the church bells that had gone off. So then we're going on and we're talking about the dog and what does the dog want you to do? Because they were still very much grieving and were not at peace. And yet the dog had instructions. Apparently they had moved the bed out of the bedroom. And I said, your dog wants you to make the bed, do blah, blah, blah. So all this stuff that made sense to them. So then I said, again, she goes, are there any more signs? And I go, okay. She said, the chimes, pay attention to the chimes. And the church bells did it again. So that's how I've become so bold about it, that the dogs will give us messages. They're puzzle pieces that I give to people. And whether it's alive or the grief or the figuring out the grief and guilt, it's when they're ready. And it can take as long as they want, and to surround yourself with people who allow you to navigate this new relationship with your dog. I think that's the essence of what the dogs want people to know and how I've come to understand it.
Yes, it makes me think about it makes me think of this one therapist I had. She said to me once, don't cast pearl in front of swine. And that's from the Bible, really, that we just show our precious parts of us to only people, like you say, that can hold our precious parts. Yeah. Because you don't want to be around people that are like, oh, it's just a dog and worse things happen, or just dismiss your grief.
Yeah. I mean, if a dog can be, a certified emotional support or therapy dog that is going to save your life when it barks, when your heart's about to stop, that's more than just a dog. Mm-hmm. That's something really powerful. It's a life force of love and support that I think that when death comes, or even grief, if you've had to rehome your dog for whatever reason, all of that's also grief. And I think people need to be allowed. And there are plenty of people too. It's not just they're not allowed, it's finding and being willing to search out who can walk that journey with you.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point there, because a lot of people do get dogs and they have the best intentions, that they believe that they can take care of that dog. And for whatever reason, some people, like you say, have to let go of dogs and get them rehomed. And that, obviously, depending on the individual, that must be very traumatizing for a lot of people.
Well, and in grief, and this is where the grief counselors are really helpful, so I do tapping with people, the EFT tapping. And so in the tapping world, it's often we go through these motions of healing. And I think in other modalities of therapy, it's like, does this remind you of another time? And so often or enough times it comes up, my dog died, my cat died. And then it reminds them of another time in their life where they lost an animal. And so grief can be double grief. And so that my dog died and I'm sort of okay. He lived a long life, but I'm still not okay. But then when we unpack that, the reason it hurts so much is because it reminds me of another grief that I wasn't able to deal with, especially for adults who had a pet loss in the past, like as a child, when they were really powerless on the timing or how it happened or how it was explained to them by an adult who did their best, but it's not healed. Having those two griefs, you have to go back and deal with the other ones in some way it help. You don't have to, that's too much pressure. It can help a lot to allow ourselves to deal with the other grief that's sometimes behind the most recent one. Yeah.
Do you think that the people in our lives can be reincarnated as dogs?
The people, oh gosh, no one's ever asked that. Can people? I don't know. I mean, at this point in my life, I'm like, I guess anything's possible. I definitely have had experiences where, and again, I don't know a lot about my clients. I purposely don't want to, as much as I love them and I get to know them. But initially, I don't want to know. So because I don't want them to think I'm influenced and was led. But I have had plenty of experiences where people have said, is this dog the reincarnation of another animal? And I'm like, okay, let me see what I get. And I will have the weirdest experiences. This one family, I said, well, they crossed. I kept getting this feeling like this. And I said, I don't know that she's the reincarnation. So I have had animals say, I came back to you. Or I said, I think this cat was a dog. There was a guy who had a cat. And I said, he acts like a dog. Do you used to have a dog? And they were testing me that cat may have been that dog. But I said, no, I don't think. I just get that they pass. I keep going like this. Well, it turns out that the puppy that they hired me for was born the day that the other dog died. Ooh. Even though they got the dog when it was like 8 weeks old or something. I didn't know about the other dog, but they were born and died the same day. And that's why she was thinking there was reincarnation. And I was like, I don't think so, but they passed. They're very different. They passed. So there's definitely more to this story that I don't know. And I just I'm drawn, and this is true of anybody, I suppose. We're drawn to where our interests and doors open. And I am continually drawn to finding out what the animals want to share. So I haven't studied a lot on reincarnation. I'm not drawn there, but it crosses into my work. So I do that little disclaimer. I'm just giving you what I get.
Of course. So so interesting. And you touched on something earlier when you were talking about the lady who was visiting the grave of the dog. Mm-hmm. So do you have actual like graveyards for dogs in America? Or would that be in somebody's home?
I think they do. Most of the people I know now, I know that because when I was a child, we had a dog and we decided to have the dog buried and they sent us a picture and I was sort of like, yeah, right. How do you know? But we did that. And so I don't know now because everyone I've known sends the dog through the vet and they get ashes delivered to the house. And then they have their ashes somewhere that they've had them in the house. They've had them, whatever is right for them. But most people typically want the ashes. So I don't know about graveyards now. I haven't heard anyone talk about that. So that woman was actually she was in the United States, but her dog with the grave that she visited was in another country.
Ah, okay. So you wouldn't have necessarily a preference over burying your dog or cremating your dog?
I don't. In fact, I don't even have a preference if someone is with their dog. There's a lot of guilt. People who are like, oh, I should have been with my dog at the time. I had a cat who the cat was very ill. And I was just, this is awful. And I heard my cat say to me, or it was a voice that was like, you don't need to be here. And so the vet came back in and said, what did you decide? I said, you can take him. I don't think he'd want me to see this. He was a very feisty cat. And I turned, and as I looked out the window while it was happening, the sun came out so bright through the trees. And I was like, I was so at peace that I made and relieved that I made that decision not to. So no, I don't have preferences on dictating how people should do anything. I just think that's too hard. And I know there are people who say it's cruel not to be there. From my experience with my cat, I felt totally different and I never regretted it. So I share that as my experience. But my big thing is empowering people to get in tune and know what's right for them and their animal, whether it's bearing them, being with them, the timing. It's such a personal decision.
Right. Yeah, it truly is. And like we always talk about grief being so unique as well to every person and how that's going to show up for them.
Yeah. Now I did have a client tell me about a tattoo she had made with her animal's ashes. Ooh. And I was like, oh, and so, people do all sorts of things, and it brought her quite a bit of peace. So, people get tattoos in California. I hear a lot more. I don't know that everyone's using their animal's ashes for the tattoo, but somebody did. I don't even remember who it was, but there are people who do all sorts of things to honor their dogs.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Can you think of any other things off the top of your head?
I have a client who's now a friend. She has one of those pillows. You can send a picture of your animal to a company and they make a pillow that looks like your dog. And there's stuffed animals too. She would go on and on that everybody should have a pillow made from a photo. And it's life size sort of. Hers is a cat and she loves it. She's like, it's the best thing ever. She could do a whole series on talking about getting a pillow made because she can hug it. She can move it around. And yeah, that's a big thing that people like.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because hugging things is a very powerful way of soothing ourselves. So yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts around consciously grieving your pets?
I think, the biggest thing is allow yourself to grieve and talk about it. And the memorial helps a lot. I'll reiterate that. Consider the memorial, and a little tribute is, I think I would like it if that became a very common thing that people did. I encourage people to consider that. And also, if you need someone to help you, it's on the days before or the months before when you think something's happening, and to support you through whatever it is, get support. There's people who do it. I have resources. There's people who do it for free. I have on my podcast, she was on, and she does it with cats for free. She'd probably do it for dogs. Get the support you need for even navigating, as I call it, navigating the rainbow bridge and knowing what to do, because you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. And I just want to reiterate as well that you do readings for dogs who are alive and dogs who are well. And I had a reading last week with Kenny, and I was like worrying about him in the car, for example. And as soon as I asked you, you're like, I'm feeling nauseous. And yeah, we discovered that he doesn't feel secure the way that he's traveling in the car. And we found out lots of things, and it's just such a fun experience to have a reading and find out, what your dog's thinking and of your relationship and what they love and what they don't like. So I really thoroughly recommend it to anybody. And you have really kindly offered to do a discount on your reading. So do you want to tell the viewers about that?
Sure, I'm happy to do it. So normally I charge a higher rate. You can see it on my website, but I will do it for $99 for an hour because I know it's a big deal. And you can use the discount code GRIEF, GRIEF. And so if you want to give it a try, I'm not trying to take advantage of you. I do need to make money to cover I have a podcast, but I'm happy to discount it for people who are really looking to get support on grief. I want to ask, and my website's Talking with the Dogs. I imagine Tara will have that. But Tara, can you talk a little bit about feeling more empowered from a session or working with someone on your dog? Do you feel like empowered to make choices that you might not have made for Kenny?
Yes, definitely. Because it's very interesting how in the reading, as you know, I didn't share anything with you pre the meeting, and he kept saying that I needed to trust my instincts about what he needs and stop worrying about what everybody else is telling me to do with him, which is completely true, because you know, my sisters are always telling me this and that and about him, and so and he was like, you know what's best for me. And yeah, it gave me a lot of reassurance and yeah, trusting myself as his mom, you know, that I'm doing the right things for him. And yeah, he has difficulty with food and eating. That's always like stressing me out. So yeah, it just, you said, yes, he's hungry. And I think that's just something that we're going to have to work on, his food. But yeah, I thought that it is definitely empowering. I definitely think it's empowering for sure.
Well, good. That's what I like to do with people dealing with the crossing over, is empower them so they're not feeling like they're drowning in grief or drowning in guilt, but they see they have choices, and there are some things that, yeah, it's awful, but it's okay to feel awful for the next 3 days and go get back in bed and take a break. Just do it. And then you'll feel better. But to be validated for our feelings and all, and be empowered that we can make the choices around our pets, I think is something I like to reinforce for people.
Yeah, and I think just a last thing that I'll add around communicating with animals or humans who have crossed over, that for people who've never had that experience at all, there is something just really miraculous about that if it's the first time, and that we can continue this relationship with our animals, with our loved ones, because they are still there in another realm.
Yeah, it's a new way, and it doesn't happen all the time. Like, I've had people say, well, I've wanted to have a dream, but I haven't yet, so I don't know, and feeling bad, like, well, why not? I want it now. But it's like, prayers aren't always answered right away, but then later in life, we might say, oh, I see, that was perfect timing. And so for me, if my cat comes back to me tonight and your cat doesn't, that doesn't mean yours isn't ever going to come back, or you're not going to get a different kind of sign that's meaningful. But the frustration, which I get, is we don't get things in our time when we want them. Grief doesn't work that way. But as long as we're open and we can allow things to happen, like the woman who kept asking about a sign, and for her, the dog kept saying the church bells, and the church bells kept chiming, but she was looking for something else, but she got it. We get it in a time frame we can't control, and may be in a way we don't expect, but they're always there. I've done this so long, and they're always there. They always come. So I wish we could, I mean, and I'm not even saying I can make it faster. I can give you bits and pieces like bring the flowers or something, but everything is just part of the life experience.
It truly, truly is. Liz, thank you so, so much. It's just been such a joy talking to you. And yeah,
You too.
I love talking about animal grief and our little furry friends that mean so much to us. And thank you for your reading with Kenny. And I'm looking forward to sharing that with my sister and my friends. So I already have told some of my friends who are like, oh, tell me about this lady. And yeah.
Well, good. It's okay when people are ready to try it or explore it, because it really can make such a difference. So thank you for bringing up this topic and sharing the idea. And if people, the one thing, if you get the idea to, whether you have, who's listening, have a memorial or encourage somebody else, they're so powerful. So thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely a great way to get creative as well, like how you choose to do a memorial and putting your efforts into creativity, you know, is also a really great way to begin healing. So yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much again. And thank you to everybody who's been listening, and lots of love.